Welcome to Sociology Droids. We're doing a deep dive today
Ooh, fun.
into the work of Pierre Bourdieu.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack some of his key concepts
Okay.
straight from the source material
Sounds good.
so you can really grasp his unique sociological perspective.
Bourdieu's work can be pretty dense,
Oh, yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's worth the effort.
I think so, too.
What's really interesting is how he blends structuralism and constructivism.
Oh, interesting.
He doesn't see them as opposing forces,
Right?
but as intertwined aspects of social life.
I see that in how he describes the body and the social world
Yeah.
as being both inside and outside of each other.
Right.
It's this constant interplay
Yes.
between objective structures and individual experiences.
Exactly.
Okay.
Bourdieu emphasizes that objective structures, what he calls spaces of position,
Spaces of positions.
have epistemological priority.
Okay.
That means they exist prior to and
Yeah.
shape individual perceptions.
Got it.
At the same time, individuals construct their understanding of the world
Okay.
through their interactions with those structures.
So it's not a one-way street.
Not
Well,
It's
interesting.
a dynamic process.
Okay.
And that's where the concept of habitus comes in.
Habitus.
Habitus is the link between these objective structures and the way we act in the world.
Okay.
It's a set of dispositions,
Right.
tendencies, and ways of perceiving
Yeah.
that are shaped by our experiences within a particular social field.
This reminds me of Merleau-Ponty's work on embodiment,
Right.
but with a distinctly sociological twist.
That's a great connection.
Yeah.
Bourdieu was definitely influenced by Merleau-Ponty, but he emphasizes the social genesis of habitus.
Okay.
It's not just about individual perception,
Right.
but about how those perceptions are shaped by our position in the social world,
Okay.
our upbringing, our social class, and all of our experiences within a specific social field.
So our individual actions
Yeah.
aren't simply free choices, but are influenced by these deeper social forces that we often don't even realize are acting upon us.
Precisely.
Wow.
And this leads Bourdieu to critique
Okay.
the way traditional social sciences often divide themselves into rigid categories. He argues that these divisions limit our understanding
Okay.
because social phenomena
Yeah.
rarely fit neatly into these boxes.
He even says that positivism
Yes.
legitimizes the limits of competency,
Right.
highlighting how staying within those comfortable boundaries
Yeah.
can restrict what we allow ourselves to study.
Right.
Yeah.
Bourdieu sees this as a form of intellectual laziness. He
Interesting.
criticizes methodologism,
Okay.
the obsession with method over substance and theoreticism,
All right.
the tendency to get lost in abstract theories detached from real-world observation.
Yeah.
He compares it to a drunk searching for his keys under the lamppost just because the light is better there.
I have to admit, I've felt that pressure to stay within those disciplinary boundaries,
Right.
especially in academia.
It's a common struggle,
Yeah.
but Bourdieu's emphasis on reflexivity
Reflexivity.
offers a way out.
Okay.
He was constantly examining his own position as a researcher,
Mhm.
recognizing how his background and experiences
Yeah.
might be influencing his observations.
He even notes that his approach
Yeah,
expresses the conditions of constitution of his early scientific habitus.
absolutely.
It sounds like this kind of self-awareness
Yes,
was key to his ability to develop such a unique perspective.
absolutely.
Yeah.
For Bourdieu, reflexivity wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was a necessary tool for breaking free from those traditional boundaries
Right.
and developing a more critical and nuanced understanding of the social world.
Okay.
And this commitment to challenging assumptions
Yeah.
extends to the very foundation of sociological research.
Yep.
Bourdieu reminds us that the preconstructed is everywhere.
So he's urging us to constantly question what we think we know
Exactly.
and to deconstruct those taken for granted assumptions
Yes,
that can cloud our judgment.
exactly.
Okay.
We need to break with common sense and the self-evident character of both objective and subjective structures.
Got it.
This requires recognizing the concept of doxa. Yeah, unquestioned, taken for granted beliefs that often function as a sort of background noise in our lives.
So dox is like the water we swim in.
Yes.
We're so immersed in it that we don't even realize it's there.
Right.
Yet it profoundly shapes our understanding of the world.
And importantly,
Right.
doxa contributes to the reproduction of social order
Okay.
by not questioning these fundamental beliefs.
Right.
We passively reinforce the existing power structures,
Interesting.
even if we don't intend to.
It seems like Bourdieu is pushing us to move beyond simply describing the social world,
Right.
to really delve into the underlying logic that governs social practice.
Right. And this brings us to his distinction between practical logic and logical logic.
Okay.
As he put it, practice has a logic which is not that of the logician.
Interesting quote.
Practical logic isn't about formal reasoning or abstract principles. It's about how people actually operate in the real world.
Right.
How they navigate the complexities of everyday life.
So it's less about theoretical coherence.
Exactly.
And more about what actually works.
Yes.
What makes sense in a practical context.
Exactly.
Right.
Practical logic prioritizes things like efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
simplicity, and adaptability,
Right.
even if that means bending the rules of formal logic.
Interesting.
One example Bourdieu uses to illustrate this is the calendar.
The calendar.
Yeah.
I would have thought of that as a particularly sociological topic.
But think about it. The
Okay.
calendar as a theoretical tool
Okay.
imposes a linear, objective framework on time,
Mm-hmm.
but our practical experience of time is much more fluid and subjective.
So he's using the calendar to show how theoretical constructs
Yeah,
can sometimes distort our understanding of everyday life.
precisely.
Yeah.
He's highlighting the limitations of applying purely abstract logical thinking to the messy reality of social practice.
Okay.
And this awareness of the gap between theory and practice
Yeah.
is crucial for understanding another key concept, symbolic capital.
Ah, yes, symbolic capital.
Yes.
The often unseen currency of prestige, recognition, and social status.
And one of the most insightful points Bourdieu makes about symbolic capital
Okay.
is that it's often disguised under the veil of generosity or disinterestedness.
Okay.
He uses a provocative example to illustrate this.
Okay.
A rich man is rich in order to give to the poor.
So he's pointing out how acts of charity or philanthropy can
Yeah.
actually be a way of maintaining social hierarchy.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
It's not about genuine altruism,
Okay.
but about accumulating and displaying symbolic capital. Bourdieu argues that there are different forms of capital, economic,
Right.
cultural, and symbolic,
Yeah.
and each plays a role in shaping our position in the social world.
And symbolic violence is how this capital, particularly symbolic capital,
Right.
is weaponized to maintain power and dominance.
Precisely.
Okay.
Symbolic violence is a subtle, often invisible form of domination
Yeah.
that operates through symbolic means.
Okay.
It's insidious
Mm-hmm.
because it's often difficult to recognize,
Yeah, I can
even for those who are being subjected to it.
So it's not about overt force or coercion,
Exactly.
but about the ways in which language symbols and cultural practices
Yes.
are used to legitimize inequality
Yes,
and
yeah.
maintain the status quo.
Exactly.
Okay.
Symbolic violence perpetuates relations of domination
Right.
under the guise of things like gift-giving tradition or even love.
Wow.
Bourdieu was particularly interested in
Yeah.
how symbolic violence operates in the realm of kinship and family relations.
He even says there are few areas in which the effect of the outsider situation is so directly visible as in analysis of kinship,
Right.
suggesting that kinship is one of the most powerful arenas where symbolic violence plays out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Bourdieu argues that kinship is not simply about biological ties,
Right.
but is a social construct shaped by power relations.
Okay.
He uses the example of parallel cousin marriage
Okay.
to illustrate how practices
Yeah.
that might seem illogical or even taboo from an outsider's perspective can actually be understood as strategic moves within a particular social field.
So even something as seemingly personal and natural as family
Exactly.
is actually a site of power struggles and strategic maneuvering.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And this is where the concept of habitus comes back into play.
Habitus again.
Because our habitus shapes our understanding of kinship,
Right.
our expectations of family roles, and our strategies for navigating those relationships. It's fascinating how these seemingly personal choices about family and relationships are actually deeply influenced by the broader social structures within which we operate.
Interesting.
This brings us to another area where Bourdieu's insights are particularly relevant, the realm of cultural production and consumption.
So he's moving beyond these more traditional sociological topics like class and kinship
Exactly.
and looking at how power dynamics play out in areas like art,
Yes.
music, and literature.
Exactly.
Okay.
Bourdieu argues that cultural production is not simply a matter of individual creativity or artistic genius. Instead, it takes place within a specific specific social field
Okay.
with its own set of rules,
Right.
hierarchies, and power struggles.
So even artists who see themselves as rebels or outsiders
Right.
are actually operating within a system that shapes their work,
Yes.
whether they realize it or not.
Precisely.
Okay.
And one of the key insights here is that aesthetic taste is not something innate or objective.
Oh, interesting.
It's a product of our social conditioning,
right.
our
This
habitus,
again.
and the specific field within which we operate.
Okay.
Bourdieu points out that the represented social world, that is the space of lifestyles,
right.
is constituted based on our dispositions.
So our preferences for certain types of
We might
music,
add this-
art, or literature
Yeah,
are actually a reflection of our position in the social world.
exactly. Bourdieu argues that our tastes are often a way of signaling our social status,
Okay.
our cultural capital,
Right.
and our distinction from other groups.
Interesting.
He even uses the example of how our habitus shapes our tastes and preferences for highbrow versus lowbrow culture
Right.
to make this point.
Yeah, it's like how some people might see opera as a sophisticated form of entertainment,
Exactly.
while others might see it as stuffy and boring. Those perceptions are shaped by more than just individual preference.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Bourdieu goes deeper than that.
Oh, really?
He argues that the dominant class
Hello.
uses its cultural capital
Mm-hmm.
to define what's considered good taste.
Oh, wow.
By controlling the standards of aesthetic judgment,
I
they reinforce their own social position
gotcha.
and exclude those who don't conform to those standards.
So it's not just about enjoying certain types of art or music.
Right.
It's about using those preferences as a way to maintain social hierarchies.
Precisely.
Fascinating.
And this is where the concept of symbolic violence comes back into play.
Symbolic violence.
The dominant class exercises its power,
Right.
not just through economic or political means,
Okay.
but also through cultural domination.
Oh, yeah.
They define what's considered valuable, beautiful, and intelligent,
Yeah.
and those who don't align with those standards
Okay.
are subtly but effectively marginalized.
So it's a form of power that often operates beneath the surface
Exactly.
through subtle cues and unspoken assumptions.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's insidious because it's often difficult to recognize and challenge.
Yeah.
We might even internalize those dominant values
Wow.
and come to believe that our own tastes are somehow inferior.
It sounds like Bourdieu is arguing that the education system
Right.
plays a key role in this process of cultural reproduction.
That's right.
Okay.
He sees education not just as a means of transmitting knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but as a powerful mechanism for inculcating the tastes and dispositions of the dominant class.
So it's not just about what you learn in school,
Exactly.
but about how you learn it.
Right.
The values that are embedded in the curriculum,
Yeah.
the ways in which certain forms of knowledge are privileged over others.
Precisely. Bourdieu argues that educational qualifications
Yeah.
often function more like titles of nobility
Oh, wow.
than certificates of competence.
Okay.
They're a way of signaling your membership in the dominant class
Right.
and granting you access to its privileges.
So even something as seemingly meritocratic as education
Right.
can actually be a way of perpetuating social inequalities.
That's Bourdieu's central argument.
Wow.
He's highly critical of the myth of meritocracy,
Okay.
the idea that success is solely based on individual talent and hard work.
Yeah.
He argues that this ignores the profound influence of social class,
Right.
cultural capital,
Yeah.
and the subtle ways in which the system is rigged in favor of those who already hold power.
It sounds like he's saying that we need to look beyond these surface-level explanations for inequality
Exactly.
and really examine the deeper structural forces that are at play.
Exactly.
Got it.
Bourdieu's work helps us to see through those myths
Mm.
and to understand the true nature of social power
Right.
and how it operates in often subtle and insidious ways.
And this brings us back to the concept of habitus, right?
Backside.
It's not just about the objective structures of society,
Right.
but also about how those structures become embodied
Yes.
in our very being,
Yes.
shaping our perception,
Right.
our actions, and ultimately our life chances.
Precisely.
Right.
Habitus is the key to understanding how social reproduction happens.
Yeah.
How those inequalities are passed down
Yeah.
from one generation to the next,
Right.
not just through material inheritance,
Right.
but through this invisible inheritance of dispositions and tendencies.
So it's a cycle that can be very difficult to break.
It can be,
Yeah.
but Bourdieu doesn't see it as completely deterministic.
Okay.
He
Yeah.
He does believe that individuals have agency,
Right.
but that agency is always constrained by the social structures
Right.
within which we operate.
So it's not about blaming individuals for their circumstances.
Exactly.
But about understanding how those circumstances are shaped by forces beyond their control.
Exactly.
Got it.
And this is why Bourdieu's work is so important.
Yeah.
It provides us with a framework for understanding the complex interplay between structure and agency,
Right.
between individual choices and social constraints.
It seems like his work is particularly relevant today.
Absolutely.
In a world where inequality is on the rise.
Yes.
And the myth of meritocracy is increasingly being used to justify those disparities.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Bourdieu's concepts provide us with powerful tools for analyzing power, deconstructing dominant ideologies, and challenging the status quo.
And for recognizing the ways in which symbolic violence operates in all areas of social life.
Precisely.
From the most intimate family relationships there to the grand stage of global politics.
Oh, precisely.
Wow. You know, it feels like we've been circling around this whole idea of habitus.
Yeah.
Throughout our discussion of Bourdieu.
Yeah, definitely.
It's clearly like a central concept for him. But I'm still not entirely sure I grasp it.
Yeah, habitus can be a tricky concept to wrap your head around because it operates on such a deep, almost subconscious level.
Okay.
Remember, Bourdieu defines it as a system of dispositions that generates and shapes our practices and perceptions.
So it's more than just our individual preferences or habits.
It's deeper than that.
It's about a whole way of seeing and being in the world that's been instilled in us through our social experiences.
Exactly. And it's this embodiment of social structure that makes habitus so powerful. It shapes our actions even when we're not consciously aware of it.
Wow.
It influences our taste in music, our sense of style, the way we speak, even the way we walk and hold our bodies.
Wow.
It really does go that deep.
It sounds like he's saying we're not just born into a social class.
Right.
But we actually inherit a whole set of dispositions that predispose us to act in certain ways.
Yes.
And to see the world through a particular lens.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this is where the concept of social reproduction comes in.
Okay.
Our habitus plays a key role in perpetuating social inequalities across generations.
So even if we have access to the same resources or opportunities, our habitus might lead us to make different choices.
Exactly.
That ultimately reinforce existing social hierarchies.
Precisely.
Wow.
And because habitus operates on such a deep level, it can be incredibly difficult to change.
I can see that.
It's not simply a matter of making a conscious decision to act differently.
Yeah.
It requires a much more fundamental shift
Okay.
in our perceptions, our values, and our very way of being in the world.
This all makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also seems a bit discouraging.
Yeah, I understand.
If our actions are so heavily influenced by our habitus, is there any room for individual agency?
That's a great question.
Or social change?
And it's one that Bourdieu grappled with throughout his work. He didn't believe that individuals are completely determined by their social environment. He recognized that we have the capacity to reflect on our habitus, to challenge it, and to make choices that deviate from those ingrained dispositions.
So it's not a completely closed system. There's still a possibility for resistance and transformation.
Absolutely. But Bourdieu was also realistic about the challenges involved in breaking free from the grip of habitus. He saw it as a lifelong process of self-reflection, critical analysis, and conscious effort to challenge those deeply ingrained patterns of thought and action.
It sounds like Bourdieu's work is both illuminating and challenging.
Yeah.
It provides us with a powerful framework for understanding how social structures shape our lives.
Absolutely.
But it also forces us to confront the ways in which we might be complicit in perpetuating those structures.
That's a great summary of Bourdieu's legacy. He gives us the tools to analyze power, to deconstruct dominant ideologies, and to imagine new possibilities for social justice. But he also reminds us that true social change requires more than just changing policies.
Or redistributing resources. It requires a fundamental shift in our habitus. A transformation in our very way of seeing and being in the world.
Well, this deep dive into the sociology of Pierre Bourdieu
Yeah.
has certainly given us a lot to think about.
Definitely.
His work is complex and challenging.
Oh, yeah.
But it's also incredibly insightful and relevant for anyone who wants to understand the dynamics of power,
Right.
inequality, and social change.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this intellectual journey.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time on Sociology Droids.